The silence in my house was a physical presence. My name is Evelyn Benson, and for 40 years, the rhythm of my life had been the boisterous, controlled chaos of my catering business, Benson's Best. The clang of pots, the urgent ringing of phones, the symphony of 100 moving parts I conducted with expert precision. But since my husband Richard's passing 6 months ago, the silence had become my most constant companion. It seeped into the plush carpets and clung to the heavy damask curtains of the home we had built together, a testament to a life of shared ambition. I had poured my soul into that business, transforming a small, home-based operation into a culinary institution, the go-to caterer for the city's elite. I did it all with the dream of leaving a meaningful legacy for our 2 children, Mark and Chloe. My estate, a carefully managed portfolio of property, investments, and the business itself, was valued at over $2 million, a sum that represented a lifetime of 18-hour days and sleepless nights. Mark, my steady, compassionate son, had been my rock through the suffocating fog of grief. He called every day, his voice a warm, reassuring presence that reminded me the world still contained kindness. Chloe, however, had become a stranger. My daughter, once so vibrant and affectionate, now moved through our conversations with a chilling, remote efficiency. Her visits felt less like a daughter checking on her grieving mother and more like an auditor assessing an asset. Her questions were always tinged with a strange urgency, veiled inquiries about finances, wills, and legal documents. She attributed my moments of sorrowful distraction to something more sinister, suggesting I was not myself, and that perhaps I should let her help with the paperwork to ease my burden. I was hurt by her coldness, but I chalked it up to her own, less demonstrative way of grieving. I was a fool. The truth, when it came, was not a slow dawning but a sudden, brutal blow. I was in the rose garden Richard had so lovingly tended, snipping away deadheads, my hands stained with dirt and my mind lost in memory. Chloe was on the patio, her back to me, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur on her phone. I assumed she was talking to a friend. I only caught snippets at first, carried on the gentle afternoon breeze, words like power of attorney, erratic behavior, and long-term planning. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I set down my shears and moved silently, using the dense foliage of a climbing hydrangea as cover, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. "No, he says we have a strong case," Chloe was saying, her tone crisp and businesslike. "Mom's been a wreck since Dad died. She's forgetful, emotional, completely unstable. Last week she misplaced a dividend check. I told Dr. Mercer it's classic cognitive decline exacerbated by grief. He's willing to testify." My breath caught in my throat. Dr. Mercer was a psychologist Chloe had insisted I see, a grief counselor she had found for me. I had thought it was an act of concern. Now I saw it for what it was, an ambush. "The goal is to be declared her legal guardian," Chloe continued, her voice dropping even lower. "It's not about the money, it's about protecting her and the estate. If she's incompetent, I can manage things properly. We can't have her making emotional decisions and squandering what Dad and I are supposed to inherit." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She wasn't my concerned daughter. She was a predator, circling, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. She was using my grief, the most profound pain of my life, as a weapon against me. In that moment, surrounded by the beautiful roses my husband had loved, the grief that had clouded my world for 6 months burned away, replaced by something else. A cold, diamond-hard clarity. The love for my daughter didn't vanish, but it was instantly encased in a thick, protective layer of ice. She wanted to paint me as a confused, helpless old woman. She wanted to steal my life's work. Fine. If she wanted a performance, I would give her an Oscar-worthy one. The curtain had just risen on the final act of my life, and I would be the one writing the script. The next time Chloe visited, the transformation had begun. I greeted her at the door, my smile a little vague, my eyes purposefully unfocused. I was wearing a cardigan inside out, a detail I was certain she would notice. She did. A flicker of something triumphant pity crossed her face before she replaced it with a mask of saccharine concern. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with condescension as she reached out to fix the collar. "Let's get you sorted out. You seem a bit scrambled today." I allowed her to fuss over me, playing the part of the frail, disoriented widow. We sat in the living room, and she began to ask me pointed questions about my investment portfolio. I would start to answer, then trail off mid-sentence. NCE, looking distractedly out the window as if I'd forgotten the topic entirely. I was just thinking about the hydrangeas, I'd murmur. Richard planted those the year you were born. I watched her barely concealed frustration, the tight set of her jaw as I expertly dodged her inquiries with a performance of gentle senility. It was a draining, soul-crushing act. Each feigned moment of confusion was a small betrayal of the sharp, competent woman I knew myself to be. It was like wearing a costume made of lead. But every time I saw the calculating look in Chloe's eyes, my resolve hardened. She was so convinced of her own cleverness, so sure of my weakness, that she couldn't see the trap being laid for her. While I was playing the fool for my daughter, I was moving with stealth and precision in the shadows. I made a clandestine call to Arthur Vance, my lawyer for over 30 years and one of Richard's oldest friends. He was a shrewd, semi-retired man with eyes that missed nothing. I met him not at his downtown office, but at a quiet, unassuming diner on the other side of town. "Evelyn, what's this all about?" he asked, his brow furrowed with genuine concern as I slid into the booth opposite him. I told him everything. The phone call, Chloe's behavior, the psychologist, the plot to have me declared incompetent. As I spoke, his concern shifted to a slow-burning anger. He removed his glasses and polished them with a napkin, a sure sign he was thinking deeply. "The audacious little viper," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "Richard would be, well, he'd be heartbroken and then he'd be furious." He looked at me, his gaze sharp. "So what's our move? We can fight this head on. A countersuit for malicious intent." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Fighting her in court would be a public, ugly spectacle. It would drag the family name through the mud and give her accusations a platform. She wants to play this game in the shadows. So will I laid out my plan. The first part was defensive, to create an ironclad, updated power of attorney and a living will that was so precise and detailed it would be impossible to contest, naming Mark and Arthur as joint executors. The second part was offensive. "I want to begin liquidating assets, Arthur," I said, my voice dropping. Specifically, the assets I had mentally earmarked for Chloe's inheritance. The vacation home in the mountains, the art collection, the blue-chip stock portfolio. I want it all turned into cash. Arthur's eyebrows shot up. "That's a significant move, Evelyn. Are you sure?" I met his gaze, my own reflecting a certainty that was as absolute as the grief had been. "She seems to believe that money is already hers, that it's her birthright. I'm about to teach her that a legacy is something that is given, not taken." The mask of frailty was my shield, but the secret meetings with my war counsel, Arthur, and my equally discreet financial advisor, a brilliant woman named Maria, were my sword. Chloe thought she was managing my decline. In reality, she was simply witnessing the overture to her own. The process of dismantling a portion of my life was far more painful than I had anticipated. Each asset I sold was a repository of memories, a tangible piece of the life Richard and I had built. The first to go was the mountain cabin, a beautiful A-frame nestled in a grove of aspens where we had spent our anniversaries. I had to sift through photographs of us laughing on the porch, of Chloe and Mark as children, building snowmen in the yard. I sold it to a young family, and as I signed the papers, I felt a pang so sharp it took my breath away. It felt like selling a piece of my own heart. But then I remembered Chloe's cold, clinical voice on the phone, and the pain was replaced by a grim sense of purpose. This was a necessary amputation to save the whole. Next was the art collection. Richard and I weren't connoisseurs, but we bought what we loved: vibrant landscapes, abstract sculptures, pieces that filled our home with color and life. I had always imagined Chloe, who had a flair for design, displaying these pieces in her own home one day. Now, I watched as Maria's contacts, quiet and professional art dealers, came to my house and appraised them with dispassionate eyes. They spoke of market value and auction potential, reducing a lifetime of shared aesthetic joy to a series of numbers on a spreadsheet. The most difficult part was the stock portfolio. It was the bedrock of our financial security, a testament to Richard's cautious but clever investing. As Maria and I went through the holdings, executing the sales, I felt a wave of guilt. Richard had built this for our children, for their future. Was I betraying his wishes? I spent a long, sleepless night wrestling with that question, his portrait on the mantelpiece seeming to watch me with sad, questioning eyes. But by dawn, I had my answer. Richard had wanted to provide for his children, yes. But he never would have tea. Rated this kind of predatory greed. He would not have rewarded betrayal. He would have been devastated by Chloe's actions, and he would have expected me to be strong enough to defend our legacy, not just our assets. My new purpose began to take shape. This money, now stained by Chloe's avarice, could be cleansed. It could be used for something pure, something that reflected the kindness and generosity that had been the true foundation of our lives. My thoughts drifted to a cause Richard and I had always supported in our own small way, a local no-kill animal shelter called the Paws and Whiskers Sanctuary. We had adopted our own beloved cat, a scruffy ginger tomcat named Marmalade, from there years ago. Richard had a soft spot for the abandoned and the overlooked. The idea took root, a small seed of righteous inspiration. This money wouldn't be a monument to Chloe's greed. It would become a haven for the helpless. It would be a legacy of compassion, born from an act of profound selfishness. With each sale, the number in a specific, separate bank account grew, a war chest Chloe knew nothing about. She, meanwhile, was growing bolder, convinced my erratic state was worsening. She saw my quiet sadness over the sales of family treasures as further proof of my instability, never once suspecting it was all part of a calculated, devastating strategy. To ensure my plan was rooted in something more than just vengeance, I knew I needed to reconnect with the cause that was quickly becoming my focus. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I drove to the Paws and Whiskers Sanctuary. It was located on the outskirts of town, a series of low, well-kept buildings surrounded by large, fenced-in grassy areas where dogs could run. The feline section was quieter, a series of interconnected rooms filled with scratching posts, climbing trees, and sun-drenched windowsills. The moment I stepped inside, I was greeted by a cacophony of meows and the gentle, rumbling purrs of 24 cats. The air smelled faintly of bleach and catnip, the scent of diligent care. The director, a woman named Evelyn Gable, was in her late 60s, with kind eyes and the calm, patient demeanor of someone who spent her days communicating with creatures who couldn't talk back. She recognized me from my picture in the society pages, but her smile was genuine, not fawning. "Mrs. Benson, what a lovely surprise," she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Can I give you a tour?" I spent the next hour with her, and it was like a balm for my wounded soul. She walked me through the facility, introducing me to the residents as if they were old friends. There was a one-eyed black cat named Pirate, a trio of ginger kittens who tumbled over each other in a fluffy orange pile, and a majestic, long-haired Maine Coon who had been surrendered when his elderly owner passed away. Mrs. Gable spoke of the challenges they faced, the constant need for donations, the struggle to pay for veterinary bills, and the dream they had of expanding. "Our biggest problem is space," she explained, gesturing to the crowded but clean enclosures. "We have to turn away so many animals, especially special needs cases, older cats, ones with chronic illnesses. We simply don't have the facilities for them. Our dream is to build a new wing, a dedicated senior and special needs center, where they can live out their days in comfort." As she spoke, my plan crystallized, its final, perfect shape emerging in my mind. This was it. This was where Chloe's inheritance would go. It wouldn't just be a donation, it would be a structure. A permanent, physical testament to what her greed had funded. I watched as a volunteer gently cradled a tiny, frightened kitten, whispering soft words of reassurance. It was a simple act of kindness, a moment of pure, unselfish compassion. It was everything my daughter was not. "Tell me more about this new wing, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady and clear. "What would it take to make it a reality?" Her eyes widened with a hope she quickly tried to temper, not daring to believe in a miracle. She started talking about architectural plans, construction costs, and endowments for ongoing care. I listened intently, a quiet, resolute calm settling over me. I wasn't just here to look at cats. I was here to lay the foundation stone of my revenge, and it was going to be a foundation of kindness, funded by cruelty. As I left the shelter that day, a sleek Siamese cat with startling blue eyes rubbed against my leg, purring loudly. I stroked its back, feeling the vibration of its contentment. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of my own. My legacy was no longer about a name on a business or a number in a bank account. It was about to become a sanctuary. Chloe's campaign to prove my incompetence escalated. She was a woman possessed by a singular, rapacious goal, and she was becoming increasingly impatient. She started insisting on being present for my doctor's appointments, her expression of deep concern a masterpiece of duplicity for the benefit of the medical staff. She'd sigh dramatically when I'd forget a medication name or the date of my last checkup. She began leaving sticky notes all over my house, ostensible reminders for me that served as curated evidence for her. Mom, don't forget to pay the electricity bill. Mom, your appointment with Dr. Mercer is Tuesday at 3. One afternoon, she arrived with a thick stack of papers and a man she introduced as her financial advisor. He was a slick, predatory-looking man with too many teeth and a handshake that was unpleasantly moist. Mom, we need to simplify your accounts, she said, her voice oozing with false sweetness. It's all become too much for you to handle. Jerry and I have a plan to consolidate everything. You just need to sign here and here. I peered at the documents through my reading glasses, pretending to be utterly bewildered by the legal jargon. In reality, I saw exactly what they were, forms that would give Chloe sweeping control over my assets. It was a brazen, full-frontal assault. Oh, dear, I sighed, rubbing my temples. This is all so confusing. My head is spinning. Richard always handled this sort of thing. I think I need to lie down. Chloe and Jerry exchanged a look of supreme frustration, the look of vultures being denied their meal. Of course, Mom, Chloe said through gritted teeth. We can look at this another time. The most harrowing ordeal was the friendly chat with Dr. Mercer, the psychologist Chloe had hired. I sat in his plush, sterile office, the scent of leather and lemon polish in the air. Chloe sat beside me, holding my hand in a grip that was meant to look supportive but felt like a shackle. Dr. Mercer asked me a series of gentle, probing questions about my memory, my mood, and my daily routines. I played my part, offering vague, meandering answers, sprinkled with just enough confusion to be convincing. I talked about Richard constantly, letting tears well in my eyes at the mention of his name. I forgot the current day of the week. I spoke of feeling overwhelmed, lost. It's like my own mind is a house I can no longer find my way around, I said, a line I had practiced for its pathetic, poetic effect. Chloe squeezed my hand, a perfect pantomime of loving concern. See what I mean, doctor, she whispered. She's just fading away. It was a grotesque theater, and I was the star. I left the appointment feeling sickened and exhausted, the sheer effort of the performance leaving me emotionally hollowed out. But I had done it. I had given Chloe and her hired gun exactly the evidence they needed. They were so close, they could taste their victory. They were building their case, brick by brick, never suspecting that the very foundation they were building on was quicksand. The more they pushed, the more convinced they became of my decline, and the more blind they were to the storm gathering just over the horizon. Every condescending smile from Chloe, every patronizing pat on my hand, was fuel for my fire. She thought she was winning. She had no idea the game was already over. The one part of my plan that caused me genuine, soul-deep pain was the effect it had on my son. Mark lived 3 hours away, but he was a constant, steady presence in my life. His calls were a lifeline, but they were becoming increasingly fraught with worry. Mom, I spoke to Chloe yesterday, he said one evening, his voice tight with concern. She's saying some alarming things, that you're not taking care of yourself, that you're getting confused about money. Is everything all right? I felt a lump form in my throat. Lying to Chloe was a necessity of war. Lying to Mark felt like a betrayal. He was a good son, a good man, and he didn't deserve to be caught in this crossfire. But I couldn't tell him the truth. It would force him into an impossible position, demanding he choose a side in a conflict he didn't even know was being waged. It would expose him to Chloe's manipulations and accusations. My silence was his protection. I'm just tired, sweetheart, I said, letting a genuine weariness seep into my voice. Your father's passing has taken more out of me than I expected. It's hard to keep track of things sometimes. Chloe thinks you should move into an assisted living facility, he blurted out, the words sounding obscene. She says you can't manage the house on your own anymore. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking gall. She wasn't just trying to steal my money. She was trying to steal my home, my independence, my very life. That's not going to happen, I said, a flash of my old, firm self cutting through the gentle facade. I quickly softened my tone. I'm fine, Mark, really. Chloe is just overreacting. You know how she can be. He wasn't convinced. He started visiting more often, his eyes filled with a sad, searching look as he watched me. He'd help around the house, fixing a leaky faucet, organizing the pantry. He'd sit with me for hours, trying to engage me in conversations, his face falling when I'd feign confusion or drift off into a sad memory of his father. Each visit was a fresh agony for me. I wanted to shake him by the shoulders and tell him I was fine, that I was sharper than I'd ever been, that his mother was a warrior, not a victim. I wanted to tell him that his sister was a monster, but I couldn't. I had to let him worry. I had to let him believe the lie just for a little while longer. The deception was a lonely burden. I was surrounded by people, my lawyers, my financial advisors, my concerned son, my predatory daughter, but I was utterly alone in my secret. There were nights I would lie awake, the weight of it all pressing down on me, and wonder if I had the strength to see it through. The plan was in motion, the pieces moving into place, but the emotional cost was higher than I had ever imagined. I was a general waging a secret war, and the first casualty was my relationship with my own beloved son. I could only pray that when the dust settled, he would understand, and more importantly, that he would forgive me. The invitations arrived like a royal summons. Thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold-embossed lettering, announcing the 30th birthday of Miss Chloe Benson. The event was to be held at the city's most exclusive country club, a place where the waiters wore white gloves and the chandeliers were worth more than most people's homes. The theme was a touch of gold, and the dress code was black tie. It was, in short, a monument to Chloe's vanity and sense of entitlement. A party she was throwing for herself, funded entirely by a generous, early birthday gift she had wheedled out of me during one of my more confused moments. I had signed the check with a trembling hand, murmuring about how Richard would have wanted her to have a beautiful celebration. She had pocketed the 5-figure sum with the smug satisfaction of a chess player taking a queen. As the date approached, our home, my home, became the headquarters for her party planning. She and her equally vapid friends would sit at my dining room table for hours, shrieking with delight over floral arrangements, ice sculptures, and the portfolio of a ridiculously expensive photographer. They spoke of designer gowns and champagne fountains, their conversation a whirlwind of frivolous consumption. I would drift in and out of the room, a ghost in my own house, offering them tea and cookies with a slightly befuddled smile. I'd listen to Chloe talk about the importance of legacy and making a statement, her words dripping with a hypocrisy so profound it was almost performance art. She was building a stage, a magnificent, glittering stage, upon which she intended to be crowned the new matriarch of the family, the glamorous caretaker of her dotty, fading mother. She had no idea that I was not just an actor in her play. I was the director, and I was about to rewrite the final scene in a way she could never have imagined. A week before the party, I made my final move. I met with Elinor Gable from the animal shelter along with Arthur Vance. We were in Arthur's stately, wood-paneled office. I presented Mrs. Gable with a certified check. The amount was just over $1 million. Her hands trembled as she took it. She stared at the number, her eyes filling with tears. For a long moment, she was speechless. "Evelyn, I don't know what to say," she finally stammered. This is a miracle. This will save so many lives. There's one condition, Elinor," I said gently. "The new wing you're going to build, I have a name for it." I told her the name. Arthur Vance, who was in on the entire plan, let out a low chuckle. Elinor Gable looked at me, a slow smile of dawning, delicious understanding spreading across her face. "I think that's the most fitting name I've ever heard," she said. The invitations for the groundbreaking ceremony were printed and ready. The guest of honor from the shelter, a charming 3-legged cat named Skipper, was selected. The pieces were all in place. Chloe was busy choosing the perfect gold accessories for her gown. I was busy polishing the perfect, metaphorical knife. Night of the party was a symphony of excess. The country club ballroom glittered, bathed in the warm, golden light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters moved silently through the throng of guests, their silver trays laden with champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Everyone who was anyone in our city's social scene was there, dressed in their finest, their laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Chloe was the radiant center of it all, a queen holding court. She wore a stunning, form-fitting gold gown that must have cost a fortune. Her smile was dazzling, her confidence absolute. She glided through the room, accepting compliments and air kisses, the very picture of a beloved daughter's self. Celebrating a milestone, she made a great show of taking care of me. She led me around by the arm, introducing me to her friends with a cloying sweetness. "This is my dear mother, Evelyn," she'd say. "Isn't she looking wonderful tonight? We're so glad she could make it." Her friends would coo at me, their eyes filled with the same pitying condescension as hers. I played my part to perfection. I smiled my vague, gentle smile. I accepted their pleasantries with a slightly confused nod. I allowed Chloe to guide me to a prominent table near the dance floor, where she seated me like a precious, fragile doll. I felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me, all of them seeing exactly what Chloe wanted them to see. A once powerful woman now diminished, a relic of a bygone era. My son, Mark, sat beside me, his face a mixture of pride for his sister and worry for me. "You okay, Mom?" he whispered, squeezing my hand. "It's a lot of noise." "I'm fine, dear," I whispered back, giving his hand a squeeze that I hoped conveyed more than my words could. "It's a beautiful party." I spent the first hour observing, a silent predator in a sea of unsuspecting prey. I watched Chloe bask in the spotlight, soaking up the admiration, completely oblivious. She was so close to her prize. In her mind, the legal paperwork was a mere formality. The victory was already won. This party was her coronation. As the main course was cleared away, a master of ceremonies, a friend of Chloe's, took to the stage. He made a series of vapid, fawning remarks about Chloe's beauty, her style, her generosity. And then he said the words I had been waiting for. "And now, for a special toast from the woman who started it all, the matriarch of the Benson family, the one and only Evelyn Benson." A polite, slightly hesitant applause rippled through the room. Chloe beamed, giving me an encouraging nod, as if she were a parent watching her child perform at a recital. Mark helped me to my feet. I felt his hand on my back, steadying me. I walked slowly, deliberately to the stage, my steps measured and calm. As I took the microphone, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes were on me. The frail old woman was about to speak. Chloe's smile was positively beatific. She raised her champagne glass, ready to receive her tribute. The spotlight was warm on my face. The performance of a lifetime was about to begin. I stood at the podium, the microphone cool and solid in my hand. The faces of 150 of the city's most influential people were turned towards me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and polite indulgence. I saw my son, Mark, his face etched with loving concern. And I saw Chloe, radiant and smug, her champagne glass held high, ready for the praise she so deeply felt she deserved. I took a deep, steadying breath. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and strong, without a trace of the feigned frailty I had so carefully cultivated for months. There was a subtle shift in the room, a collective, subconscious lean forward. This was not the voice of a confused old woman. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate my daughter Chloe's 30th birthday. 30 years. It seems like only yesterday I was holding her in my arms, a tiny, helpless creature, completely dependent on the kindness and care of others to survive." I smiled warmly, a predator's smile. Chloe's own smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Growing up, I tried to instill in both my children the importance of compassion, of looking after those who cannot look after themselves. My late husband, Richard, and I always believed that a person's true worth is not measured by what they accumulate, but by what they give away. Recently, I've been doing a great deal of thinking about my own legacy and what truly matters." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the silent room before landing directly on Chloe. "And I have you, my darling daughter, to thank for bringing this into such sharp focus for me. You have taught me a profound lesson about the importance of caring for those who are abandoned, neglected, or discarded." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Chloe's face had gone rigid, the painted-on smile now a grotesque mask of confusion. "And so," I continued, my voice ringing with triumphant clarity, "in honor of that lesson, and in honor of my daughter, I have decided to make a significant philanthropic gesture. I have recently liquidated certain assets, and moments ago, my foundation made a $1 million donation to the Paws and Whiskers Animal Sanctuary." A wave of astonished gasps, and then a burst of spontaneous, enthusiastic applause filled the room. People were cheering, smiling, touched by the incredible act of generosity. I held up a hand, and the applause slowly died down. I wasn't finished. "This donation," I announced, my voice booming through the microphone, "will fund the construction of a brand new, state-of-the-art facility they have empty for years. A special wing designed to house and care for their most vulnerable residents." I let the suspense build for a final, delicious moment. "It is my distinct honor to announce the official name of that new building, the Chloe Benson wing for abandoned and neglected animals. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The cheering died in people's throats. Jaws literally dropped. Everyone turned to stare at Chloe. Her face had gone from confused to chalk white. The champagne flute slipped from her numb fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the dead quiet. I leaned into the microphone for my final, devastating line. A legacy, my dear Chloe, to ensure that you are forever associated with the virtue of caring for the helpless things one has decided to cast aside. Happy birthday, darling. I placed the microphone back on its stand and walked, with a steady, regal gait, off the stage, the profound, horrified silence of the crowd my standing ovation. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of social horror. No one knew what to do. The string quartet, after a few moments of panicked silence, hesitantly began to play again, but the music sounded tinny and absurd in the funereal atmosphere. Guests, who moments before had been laughing and mingling, now stood in awkward, silent clusters, whispering behind their hands and stealing shocked glances at Chloe. They were like witnesses to a spectacular, unthinkable car crash. Chloe herself was frozen, a statue of public humiliation. Her friends fluttered around her, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. I saw her look at me from across the room, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The mask of the loving daughter had been ripped away, and what lay beneath was raw, impotent rage. I didn't wait for the confrontation. I found Mark, who was standing pale and stunned near our table. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "What did you do?" "I did what I had to do," I said calmly, taking his arm. "Let's go home, the party's over." The drive home was silent. Mark gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his mind clearly reeling from the public detonation he had just witnessed. I knew he had a million questions, but he waited until we were back in the familiar quiet of my living room. "Okay," he said, finally turning to face me, his eyes searching mine. "Talk to me, please. You haven't been yourself for months, and now this." That wasn't the act of a confused woman. And so I told him everything. The phone call I overheard in the garden, Chloe's calculated plot with the lawyer and the psychologist, my performance, the secret meetings, the liquidation of the assets. I laid the whole ugly story bare. He sank into an armchair as he listened, his anger at Chloe warring with his shock at the depth of my deception. "So all those times I was worried sick about you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "All that." "It was an act. It was a shield, Mark," I said softly, "and a sword. She left me no other way to fight. She was going to strip me of everything, my home, my independence, my dignity. I couldn't let that happen, and I couldn't drag you into the middle of it." He ran a hand through his hair, his expression pained. "I can't believe she would do that to her own mother." He looked at me, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "But Mom, to do it like that, in front of everyone." "She built the stage, Mark," I replied, my voice hard as steel. "She sent out the invitations. She wanted a public coronation as the new head of this family. It was only fitting that she receive a public abdication instead." My phone buzzed on the table beside me, a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent, furious words, riddled with typos and venom. It ended with, "You will regret this. You have destroyed me." I showed the message to Mark. He read it and shook his head sadly. "No," he said, looking at me. "She destroyed herself." The war was over. The victory was absolute. But as the adrenaline faded, a profound weariness settled over me. I had saved my kingdom, but I had officially and irrevocably lost my daughter. The story of Chloe's birthday party became the stuff of local legend overnight. It ripped through the city's social circles like a wildfire. My phone rang incessantly for days. Some calls were from gossips, hungry for more salacious details. I ignored those. Others were from old friends, their voices a mixture of shock and awe. "Evelyn, I had no idea," one said. "You are, without a doubt, the toughest woman I have ever known." The pause and whiskers sanctuary was, of course, ecstatic. Eleanor Gable called me, her voice choked with joyful tears. The story had been picked up by the local news, and donations were pouring in from all over the state. My act of pointed revenge had inspired a wave of genuine public generosity. "You Haven. T just built a new wing, Evelyn," she told me. "You've raised awareness for our cause in a way we never could have dreamed. You're a hero to these animals." Her words were a comfort, a confirmation that I had channeled the ugliness of Chloe's greed into something beautiful and good. Mark became my shadow for a while, his worry for my mental state replaced by a fierce, protective loyalty. He was angry at his sister, but more than that, he was heartbroken for our shattered family. "Will you ever speak to her again?" he asked me one afternoon as we sat in the garden, the very spot where I had overheard the betrayal that started it all. "The ball is in her court," I said, pruning a rose bush with steady hands. "But for there to be a conversation, she would first have to become a person I would want to talk to. That would require an apology, and I don't think she's capable of one." I was right. Chloe's response was not remorse, but retaliation. A letter arrived from her lawyer a week later, full of blustering threats about contesting my erratic and emotionally driven financial decisions and accusing me of public defamation. My own lawyer, Arthur, dismissed it with a contemptuous laugh. "It's the desperate flailing of a drowning woman, Evelyn," he assured me over the phone. "She has no case. You were in your right mind, you made a legal donation, and as for defamation, well, telling the truth isn't a crime." Chloe had completely miscalculated. She thought my public announcement was a moment of madness, a final, dramatic act of a deteriorating mind. She couldn't comprehend that it was, in fact, the most coldly logical and sane thing I had done in months. She had tried to create a public narrative of my incompetence. I had simply replaced it with the true story of her own moral bankruptcy. Her friends abandoned her. Her reputation was in tatters. She had become a punchline at the very country club where she had tried to crown herself queen. She had wanted my money, but she had also wanted the status and respect that came with it. In losing one, she had irrevocably lost the other. Several months later, I stood on a patch of freshly turned earth, a small silver shovel in my hand. The sun was warm, the sky a brilliant blue. A crowd of reporters, shelter volunteers, and prominent community members had gathered. Beside me, a leaner gable beamed, and a banner flapped in the breeze. It read, "Future home of the Chloe Benson Wing for Abandoned and Neglected Animals." It was the official groundbreaking ceremony. The mayor gave a speech praising my generosity. A local news anchor interviewed me, asking what had inspired such a remarkable gift. "My late husband and I always believed in giving a voice to the voiceless," I said, my answer smooth and practiced. "This facility will be a haven for the most vulnerable among us. It's a legacy of compassion." I didn't need to mention Chloe. The name on the banner did all the talking for me. After the official photos and handshakes, I spent some time with the real guests of honor, a few of the shelter's friendliest cats who had been brought along for the event. I sat on a bench, and a small, three-legged tabby named Skipper immediately hopped into my lap, purring like a tiny engine. As I stroked his soft fur, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for a long, long time. I had spent my whole life building a business, a fortune, a legacy of success. I thought that was what I was supposed to leave behind, but I was wrong. The numbers in my bank account felt meaningless compared to the solid, comforting weight of the purring cat in my lap. My new legacy was not in boardrooms or stock portfolios. It was here, on this patch of dirt that would soon become a sanctuary. It was in the lives, both animal and human, that would be touched by this place. Chloe had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life. By trying to steal my material wealth, she had forced me to discover a different, more meaningful kind of inheritance. She had wanted to write me out of my own life story. Instead, she had handed me the pen and allowed me to write the most triumphant final chapter imaginable. I looked at the banner, at my daughter's name so permanently and publicly attached to a legacy of abandonment. There was no triumph in it anymore, no sting of victory, just a quiet, somber sense of justice. She had gotten the legacy she deserved, and I, finally, had found the peace I had earned. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The construction of the new wing at the shelter became my project, my purpose. I was at the site several times a week, consulting on plans, watching the walls go up, my old business acumen finding a new, more joyful application. Mark and I grew closer than ever, our relationship rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The grand, silent house that had once felt like a mausoleum of my grief now felt like a home again, filled with his frequent visits and the sea. Comforting presence of Skipper, the three-legged cat whom I had, of course, adopted. One day, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was Chloe S. My first instinct was to throw it, unopened, into the fire. But curiosity, or perhaps some lingering, vestigial maternal instinct, won out. I sat in my favorite armchair, Skipper purring on my lap, and slid it open with a letter opener. It was not the apology I knew would never come. It was 5 pages of bitter, rambling invective. She blamed me for everything: her public humiliation, her financial ruin, the loss of her friends. She called me cruel, vindictive, and monstrous. She painted herself as the victim, a loving daughter who had only been trying to help her grieving, unstable mother. It was a masterwork of self-delusion. There was not a single sentence of self-reflection, not a flicker of remorse. As I read the final, hateful lines, I felt nothing. The anger I had held onto for so long had vanished. The pain of her betrayal had faded to a dull, distant scar. All I felt was a profound and desolate sadness. Not for me, but for her. She was a ghost, haunted by her own greed, trapped in a prison of her own making. She would spend the rest of her life defined by one catastrophic act of selfishness. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It was a final closing of a door, a quiet acknowledgement of a loss that had happened long ago. I had lost my daughter, but I had found myself. I had my son. I had my purpose. I had my peace. A few months later, the Chloe Benson Wing for Abandoned and Neglected Animals officially opened its doors. It was a beautiful, light-filled space, full of comfortable beds, sunny perches, and the gentle sounds of purring. I stood in the main room, watching as the first residents, a dozen elderly and special needs cats, were released into their new home. They explored with a cautious curiosity, their old bodies moving with a new sense of freedom and safety. I thought about the name, my grand, public act of revenge. It no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a reclamation. Chloe's name, which she had tried to use to steal a legacy, was now forever tied to a legacy of kindness she had no part in creating. It was a final, perfect irony. My life's work was safe, my future was secure, and my legacy was no longer one of wealth, but one of warmth. And in the end, that was an inheritance worth more than any amount of money.